Hey everyone, this training reviews the workflow for clients whose treatment at JADE is being paid for by Federal Probation or Pretrial Services. And this first distinction is maybe one of the most important ones. So, a client can be involved with Federal Probation and still have CCBHO or another insurance payer covering their treatment. In that situation, most of the additional federal billing paperwork discussed in this training does not apply. We still obtain the appropriate federal consent and communicate with the federal probation officer just as we would with any other probation officer or legal system contact. This training is specifically about clients whose federal probation or pretrial services funding is paying for their treatment at JADE. So, for federally funded clients, there are four things to remember. First, we need to check the Prob 45. We also need to make sure that we request everything that the client needs, which means getting signatures when services happen and making sure that monthly paperwork is uploaded by the 5th of the following month every month. So the federal workflow begins with the Prob 45. Federal typically sends the initial Prob 45 to JADE administration. The Prob 45 tells us whether the client is on pretrial or post-conviction. It provides the client's PACS number, identifies the probation officer, and tells us exactly which services Federal has authorized. Alex and Jamie complete the initial administrative setup in CareLogic, and this includes entering the PACS number, selecting the correct federal payer, entering the probation officer's information, uploading the Prob 45, and scheduling the evaluation. Usually, the first Prob 45 authorizes the assessment only. And that means that the evaluator should never assume that ongoing treatment is already authorized simply because the client was referred by federal probation. Any qualified JADE clinician can complete a federal evaluation. We're going to complete the normal JADE evaluation and intake paperwork, including the required federal consent. Because this is a federally funded client, the client signs the federal monthly sign-in log instead of the standard JADE encounter form for that service. Once the evaluation is complete and you have determined the recommended level of care, there are two additional steps. First, complete the federal intake assessment report. This is the federal form that summarizes the diagnosis, biopsychosocial information, targeted problem, treatment recommendation, level of care, prognosis, and counselor information. Second, we're going to request an amended Prob 45 that matches your actual treatment recommendation. This step is extremely important because Federal will only pay for services that appear on the active Prob 45. When requesting the amendment, be very specific. For example, if you're recommending IOP, your request may include IOP group therapy 3 times per week for 3 hours each group, individual counseling at 1 hour each, twice per month, urine drug screening at least once per month. For IOP clients, request individual counseling at least twice per month. For OP clients, request individual counseling at least once per month. Urine drug screening also needs to be specifically requested. If you forget individual counseling or urine screens, Federal may issue the amended Prob 45 without those services. If they are not listed, JADE may not be able to bill Federal for them. The recommendation in your assessment, the Federal Intake Assessment Report, and the amended Prob 45 request should all tell the same clinical story. The amended Prob 45 request should go to myself, Jen, Alex, Damon at Federal Probation, Colleen at Federal Probation, and the client's probation officer listed on the Prob 45. There is also a Prob 45 or Prob 45 amendment form available in CareLogic. Staff can use that form to document the requested authorization and route it through the appropriate administrative process. And when the amended Prob 45 comes back, the client needs to sign it, and it needs to be uploaded to their document library in CareLogic. So we want to think of the Prob 45 as the authorization document. If a service is not listed on the active Prob 45, do not assume that Federal will pay for it. Therapists should review the Prob 45 when they begin working with a federally funded client. You should also review it anytime the client's treatment needs change. A new amendment may be needed if the client moves from IOP to OP, or the client moves from OP up to IOP. Individual counseling needs to be added or increased or even decreased, or same with urine drug screening, whether it needs to be added or increased. This also can go for family counseling if we're recommending that, or if telehealth becomes clinically necessary, or any other service is needed that's not currently authorized. When requesting an amendment, include the clinical reason for the change, and whenever possible, request the amendment before providing the new service. Do not assume that Federal will retroactively authorize something after we've already provided. So telehealth requires special attention with federally funded clients. JADE cannot bill Federal for a telehealth service unless the client's probation officer has approved telehealth services, and that includes one-time emergency situations. For example, a client may call and say that they can't get to the office because they're sick, or transportation fell through, or the weather's bad, or their work schedule changed, but otherwise still could attend group, even though they just can't get to the office. So you can't simply convert that appointment to a telehealth and assume that it remains federally billable. And I know that that's different from the normal way that Jade practices with every other client. We're usually very lenient and very client-centered, making sure that clients can attend whatever service in whatever capacity they're able to. For federal, we need to pause here. If telehealth is clinically appropriate, contact the probation officer as soon as possible and request approval. Federal has specifically identified unauthorized telehealth as an ongoing billing problem. So to help prevent accidental scheduling, federally funded clients may also have a telehealth scheduling form in CareLogic. If that form is present, staff should not schedule telehealth unless the appropriate approval process has occurred. If the client later obtains insurance and federal is no longer paying for treatment, that restriction can be removed. Or if their probation officer approves telehealth services, that restriction can be removed too. Federally funded clients use the federal monthly sign-in log instead of the usual JADE encounter form for federally funded services. So you need to start a new log every month. The clinician providing the service is responsible for documenting the service and obtaining the client's signature at the time that the service occurs. Do not wait until the end of the month to try to reconstruct several weeks of signatures. If the client is scheduled and does not attend, document the no-show on the monthly log. There is no client signature needed for a no-show, and the service is not billed as an attended service. Before uploading the log, check the client's name, the PACS number, pretrial or post-conviction status, service dates, correct federal service codes, client signatures, staff signatures, and overall completeness and legibility. So the most common service codes that we're going to use is 1010 for urine collection, testing, and reporting. Front desk is going to use that one most often. Then there's 2011 for intake assessment and report, 2010 for individual counseling, 2020 for group counseling, and that includes OP and IOP, and 2030 for family counseling. Individual group and family counseling are billed in 30-minute units. So for a 2-hour OP group, that would be 4 units of 2020. Family counseling must also specifically appear on the Prob45 before it's scheduled as a federally funded service. Completed monthly logs must be uploaded to the client's CareLogic document library no later than the 5th of the following month. Billing cannot complete federal invoicing without the supporting documentation. Federal urine drug screening has its own documentation process. Front desk staff maintain the federal urine documentation in the client's green federal chart. Front desk staff are responsible for collecting the specimen, following the chain of custody procedures in the collection on the federal urine log, maintaining the log, and uploading the completed monthly urine log to CareLogic. Evaluators should request at least 1 UDS per month when completing the amended Prob45 request, with additional testing requested when clinically appropriate. If the front desk notices that urine drug screens are being collected but are not listed on the Prob45, notify the therapist or evaluator immediately. We may still have the clinical or regulatory reasons to collect a urine specimen, but federal can only reimburse the service if it's authorized. Federal probation wants meaningful communication about both concerns and progress. So that can include attendance, engagement, progress in treatment, reoccurrence of substance use, increased clinical risk, barriers to treatment, behavioral concerns, and possible level of care changes. Myself and Leanna meet with federal probation regularly and may reach out to clinicians when federal has questions about a specific client. So if there's something you want discussed during that meeting, send it to myself or Leanna ahead of time. However, don't wait for the monthly meeting when something requires immediate action. Reach out to that client's PO. You can copy me and Leanna on it if you'd like. And Prob45 amendments, authorization requests, significant clinical changes, or urgent concerns should be communicated directly to the probation officer. And when a federally funded client is discharged, complete all of JADE's usual discharge documentation. The therapist must also email a discharge summary to the client's probation officer and Colleen at the Federal Probation Office. This applies to whether the client successfully completes treatment, is administratively discharged, is lost to contact, transfers to another provider or level of care, federal supervision ends, or if JADE closes the episode for any other reason. So the federal workflow can feel pretty paperwork heavy, but most problems can be prevented by remembering just a few basic rules. First, confirm that federal is actually the payer. Federal involvement alone does not make this workflow apply. Second, check the active Prob45 before providing or changing services. Third, when you request an amended Prob45, request everything that the client clinically needs, including individual counseling and urine drug screening. Fourth, complete the federal intake assessment report after the evaluation when requesting ongoing treatment authorization. Fifth, get signatures when services occur rather than trying to reconstruct them later. And finally, make sure that the monthly sign-in log and urine documentation are complete and uploaded by the 5th of the following month. The full Federal Probation and Pretrial Services staff paperwork and authorization guide is available for reference and includes the federal forms, service codes, and probation officer directory. When you're unsure whether something is authorized, ask before providing the service. It is much easier to obtain the correct authorization first than try to fix missing federal documentation after the fact. Thanks.